Get ready for certified USDA prime gun stuff on the GunGuyTV podcast.
Hi, this is Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV and for listening to this podcast. I'm very grateful that you do. Please don't stop. I hope you'll excuse me this time around. I've got a horrible cold. I've been sick for several days now. And so I probably sound like a kind of a combination of James Earl Jones, Kermit the Frog, and Sam Elliott. I don't really mind Sam Elliott and James Earl Jones. It's the Kermit the Frog part that I think I'm not all that fond of. I hope you'll bear with me. My voice is really a mess here, and I promise I will do the best I can with the podcast here. Now, the first half of the podcast, I'd like to talk about some words that need defining, I think, not only in our vocabulary, but also in the way we think. Because words mean something. So we're going to talk about master and servant. And no, we're not talking about slavery there. And we're going to talk about the difference of with and for, and how they relate to our Second Amendment rights and what we do to fight for them. Then in the second half of the podcast, which is only available on Patreon, we're going to talk about which is better, the Mini 14, the AR-15, or the AK. And that's a battle that's been going on for a long time. I have a feeling that no matter what I share in that particular discussion, somebody's going to think me right and someone's going to think me horribly wrong. Well, that's okay. We'll talk more about that when we get there. But first, let's talk about the difference between master and servant. Now, when we talk master-servant relationships, we tend to think of slavery, and that's not what I'm referring to here by any stretch of the imagination. I'm referring to the person who is in charge and the person who hires someone to do a job. And that person who is hired to do the job is more of a servant, and the person who does the hiring is more of a master. So, for example, my wife and I own a small business. When we founded the business, we had certain founding documents. We had articles of incorporation, we had bylaws, we had policies and procedures which get updated periodically, and bylaws get updated periodically. These are the founding documents of the company, and they dictate how the company is to be run. And then we have a board of directors. We've always had a board of directors. That board of directors then can hire a manager or an executive and then directs what that executive is to do. And so the board of directors, which is comprised of stockholders or owners of the company, then hires someone to serve them as the manager of the company and do a job managing. Therefore, you have the owners, the founders, and the board of directors, who are all owners, they're all stockholders. Those are the masters and the person who's hired to do the job of run the company, and everybody that works for them, those are all servants of those people who own the company. So if I look at it that way, many years ago when I worked for a division of Ziff Davis, I was a servant of the Ziff brothers who owned the company. They were the owners. It was a privately held company, and I worked at one of the divisions in a sales department. I was one of the salespeople. I worked for my manager, who worked and directly reported to the vice president of sales, who directly reported to the president of that division, who reported to someone else who reported to the Ziff brothers. But we were all paid employees there to do a job specifically that the Ziff brothers, the owners of the company, wanted us to do. So they, in a sense, were the masters and we were the servants. I think it's important to understand that concept when we look at how our government works. For example, we are often told that we elect our leaders, and we will refer to them as our elected leaders. But in actuality, what they are is our elected servants. Let me read a quote for you from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. The key is that the government is established among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In other words, the governed, you and me, the people, they establish a government, and then they hire managers to manage the government, and those managers are the servants of the people. That's how it works. So just as when I worked for Ziff Davis, and I worked for one division of that company, I was one of many people who worked for the Ziff Davis organization. I was a no-name person somewhere. I'm sure the Ziff brothers never heard of me and never would. Nevertheless, I was one of the people who worked for them, serving them. I was a servant. I was not a master. In the same way, every government employee is a servant of the people. Let that sink in for just a minute. Every government employee is a servant of the people. I understand that it doesn't seem that way when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever you call it in your state, or you go to some government agency asking for help or to apply for something or whatever. They always make it appear as if they are the people in this enormous amount of authority and you are just some underling, some peasant who has to genuflect in front of them in order to accomplish anything. That is because we have allowed our government to think that it is the master and that we, the people, are the servants, when in actuality our founders meant it to be precisely the other way around. They meant for us to have small government, that we were the masters over, and that government was there to serve us in very limited ways, that otherwise we were to be a free people, to have our liberty, not the liberty the government wants us to have, but our liberty in total, unencumbered by an overarching, overriding government. This has actually gotten so turned on top of its head that it's analogous to a rich person's home. Let's look at it, a little different metaphor, perhaps. Let's take a rich person's home in Europe. Let's select one, for example, in England, and let's say that you are the lord of the manor and you have an enormous home in England, and it's an old family home that you've had for hundreds of years. You're very wealthy, and as a result, you have a number of people who work to manage that property and manage that home. Now, my understanding, I've never been in that position. I'm a middle-class, blue-collar guy is what I am. I'm nothing more than that and nothing less. So I've never had servants other than we did have a gardener for a while who cut the grass, and that was about it. But my understanding, from my wife at least, from watching lots of British TV shows and murder mysteries and dramas, is that in a home like that, you have a manager, and he would be the butler. The butler then manages the home and the operation of the home on a day-to-day basis. His job is to hire people, fire people, make certain that the home runs efficiently and effectively, make sure the wishes of the Lord, the master of the home, are carried out by the staff, whatever that may be. Now, at some point or other, if that manager, that butler, somehow in his mind becomes master of the place, and the Lord, the people, the family that own the home somehow become his servants, then all of a sudden one day he might decide he wants to paint the place some obnoxious color. Gee, I think I'll paint it pink with green polka dots because I've always liked that weird combination, so I'm going to do that. I don't think that's going to sit well with the people that own the home. So the people that own the home are going to object to that. They're going to say, no, you're not painting the house pink with green polka dots. And a smart butler might say, well, Lord, you understand that the place does need to be painted, so regardless of what color it is, I would like to set aside the funds to paint the house. What color would you like it painted? It is the decision of the master of the home whether indeed the home gets painted, and if so, what color. Whatever those decisions are, it is the job and duty of the butler, the manager of the property, to carry them out. That's how it works. And that's how our government should work. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Now, an evil butler who really wanted to paint that property green with pink polka dots might not tell the Lord and Master that that's what his intention is. And in the process of getting ready to do that, he may have the staff take all the sharp implements out of the house anything that could be used as a blunt trauma weapon, anything that might be used to resist that decision would be removed from the house. So when the master of the home and the family of the home discover that this is the decision the butler has made, they have no physical way to resist the house being painted in this obnoxious color. That is precisely what we see in Virginia. That is precisely what we see happening in California. That is precisely what we see happening around our country. There is no reason for a servant to fear the master unless the servant is doing something that the servant knows full well the master will object to. You know, the other day I did a live stream on YouTube and I had a gentleman type in a question. How do I feel about the idea that California law enforcement officers have the authority to take a firearm off of a concealed carry permit holder during a traffic stop, supposedly for the officer's self-protection and so that they'll feel better? In order to carry on this discussion, I'm going to answer that question right after this. There are several ways that you can help with the production costs of GunGuyTV on YouTube and the other places and this podcast. One of the best ways you can do that is by listening to the entire podcast, which is 1 hour long. The first hour, or first half hour, is actually syndicated free of charge on your favorite podcast player. The second half hour is available only on Patreon. Now, you have to subscribe in order to hear it. But there are other things that you get when you do. There's lots of exclusive content you'll find only on Patreon. So I urge you to check us out on Patreon and subscribe so that you can hear the entire podcast as well as the other content. It'll be great stuff for you, and it helps us a ton.
Saving the Second Amendment, one episode at a time. This is the GunGuyTV podcast.
As I was mentioning before, a gentleman typed in a comment during a live stream and asked me how I felt about a law enforcement officer feeling uncomfortable about someone having a concealed carry permit and carrying a firearm in their presence, so much so that the officer would want to disarm that person during a traffic stop. Culturally, I understand that that is the norm in the state of California. So from that standpoint, since it is a cultural norm, I understand that brushing up against it with any authority or really resisting it strongly is probably not going to work well, and that over time, those things can be overcome. We lost our rights over time. We're going to have to recover them probably over time. But if you ask me philosophically how I feel about it, the answer would be pretty simple. If the officer is going to be afraid of a law-abiding citizen who has a concealed carry permit, then he's being very foolish. He should probably be happy that there's a law-abiding citizen with a concealed carry permit carrying a firearm, because that citizen may step up and help him if and when he ever needs it, and that citizen happens to be around. There is no logical or sensible reason for a police officer to be afraid of a law-abiding American who is carrying a firearm. There's no reason at all for them to be afraid of that person, and yet they are. Gee, I wonder why that is. Could it be that they've forgotten who the servant is and who the master is? Could it be that they've elevated themselves to the person in authority and forgotten that the people really have the authority? We're seeing this more clearly than ever in Virginia right now. We have a protest or a rally coming up. And so what has the governor done? The governor has declared a state of emergency in order to ban firearms from the Capitol during the time of this rally, because the government authorities, the servants of the people, are so afraid of the people they serve that they don't want them to be armed, not realizing that the overwhelming majority of the people who would show up are law-abiding, honest Virginians who have no desire to be violent whatsoever. Instead, what they want to do is have their government actually listen to their complaint and not violate their Second Amendment rights. Remember, I talked about those founding documents in our company, the Articles of Incorporation, the policies and procedures, the corporate bylaws. Countries have founding documents as well, and we do. We have the United States Constitution. That's a founding document. And in there is something called the Bill of Rights, and one of those rights says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's a founding document of our republic, and the state of Virginia does not have the authority or the right to violate it. Nevertheless, they're so afraid of Virginians that they want to disarm them if they're going to come and rally. The foolish and idiotic part of that is anybody who wants to be violent is not going to obey that rule anyway. And now what you've got is an awful lot of law-abiding Virginians who are completely helpless because you decided to disarm them, and now some violent person comes and they can't do anything about it. It's as if we've gone back to the old-time movies, and the governor and the legislature of Virginia are afraid people are going to show up with pitchforks and torches, so they're going to ban pitchforks and torches. I illustrate this to you because I think it's important for us to change the way we think. We have been so conditioned to believe that the government's job is to lord over us and that they are the ones with the authority. They're actually not. We are the ones with the authority. I'll read that Declaration of Independence quote to you again. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, that's the reason why government is instituted, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The only reason we have a government is because it's an expedient way to secure our rights. We do not have a government as a means or mechanism to limit or infringe upon our rights. Our government has grown way too strong and way too powerful. It thinks it's the master and that you and I, the people, are the servants. When our founders, the founders of this country, believed it should be exactly the other way around. We have to change our way of thinking before we can change the way our government works. This, by the way, is precisely what irritates the swamp about Donald J. Trump. Like him or not personally, one thing that Donald Trump has down is the fact that he is a servant of the United States people. I can't tell you how many times I've heard him say, "I'm here representing the United States." Just the other day, he signed a Phase 1 trade deal with China, and in the process of doing so, he said, "We came together to negotiate. We represented two different countries." He represented China. I represent the United States. He understands that this is not his country to lord over. Rather, he is a paid servant of the people. While I don't believe that Mitch McConnell quite understands this, the way he speaks makes it seem like he does. In a speech before the empty Senate, which is how they do that, a few days ago, he said that rather than focusing on impeachment, the Senate would rather be about doing the people's business. Now, that's a phrase they use because it sounds good. In actuality, I think they spend most of their time doing their own business. But nevertheless, that is the general idea. They are servants of the people to do the people's business. In my 60-some-odd years of life, President Donald Trump is the only president we've ever had who clearly understands that. And I credit that to his business history. He understands that everybody who works for the Trump organization is a servant of the Trump family who owns that organization. And if that organization ever went public and had stockholders, then everyone who worked for that organization would be a servant of those stockholders, not a servant of themselves. And the stockholders would not be the servants of the people who work for the corporation. The Trump family is not the servant of the manager of one of the hotels that they own. Quite the contrary. However many hotels they own has a manager, each and every one of them, and those managers are all servants of the Trump family. They work for them. Now, they can choose not to and go get a job someplace else. They're not slaves, but nevertheless, they've chosen to serve that family. In the same way, if I hire a manager tomorrow to work for my business and manage my business instead of my wife and I doing it, that manager becomes a servant of the Persinger family because we own all of the stock of KBTN Inc. That's how it works. And that's the difference between a master and a servant. The people of the United States are not the servants of the government. They are the masters of it. That is something the Virginia government needs to learn. That is something the California government needs to learn. Hopefully, with this rally coming up on Monday, we'll have a peaceful rally, a successful rally, and it will move that change, that sea change in our thinking. I really want to encourage you to change the way you think about this. That when you are electing a representative, think about it. I'm electing a person to serve me in that role as one of the people of my state, one of the people of my country. Is that person's mindset the right mindset? Does that person have the mindset of a servant, or does that person have a mindset that wants to lord over me? When you look at the presidential contenders on the Democratic side, you're going to see a whole cadre of people who want to lord over you, and nobody on that side who wants to be your servant. I think as we start to understand the difference between the two and understand what the founders envisioned, we'll find ourselves voting differently and perhaps electing different leaders than we have before. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to come back and we're going to define two more words, with and for. We'll do that in just a second. Another way that you can help support GunGuyTV is by shopping Amazon using our Amazon link. Now, the truth is, Amazon is not a terribly gun-friendly company. That said, you can pick their pocket a little bit and support GunGuyTV if you shop Amazon anyway. One way to do that is to go to our website at GunGuy.tv. Click on the banner on the top that's the Amazon banner. That will take you to our Amazon link. If you then bookmark that link and go to Amazon using that link each time, from there, all you have to do is shop. Once you've done that, anything that you buy on Amazon will get credit for. It doesn't cost you a dime. Everything for you is exactly the same. The only difference is we get paid a little marketing fee because you arrived at Amazon to begin with through our affiliate link. Now, I don't know how that works on the Amazon app. I've been asked that question, and I don't have an answer for you. But I do know it works very well if you're shopping on your computer and you're using that link. So go to GunGuy.tv, click on the banner on the top. That's the Amazon banner. That will take you to Amazon using our link. And if you just bookmark that page and use that every time you go, you'll be able to shop normally, and everything you buy, we'll get a little credit for, and it helps support GunGuyTV.
The opinions expressed by the Gun Guy are always right, unless they're wrong.
While we're on the subject of defining words, let's look at two words which screw us up on a regular basis, with and for. Let me give you an example. There is a huge difference between fighting with my wife and fighting for my wife. Wouldn't you agree? If I'm in the regular habit of fighting with my wife, my marriage is going to be a wreck. On the other hand, as a faithful follower of Jesus Christ, if I'm in the regular habit of fighting along with the Lord for my wife, then our marriage will go well. There's a big difference between applying with and for in many circumstances. I am in the habit, after decades of marriage, of fighting for my marriage and for my wife. I do not fight with my wife, and I do not fight with my marriage. Those two things don't work. As gun owners, we are in the habit, unfortunately, of fighting with each other rather than fighting for each other, and it does us a lot of harm. We all have favorite things we want to back or favorite things we want to support. I can't tell you the number of people who will tell me, NRA is terrible, support GOA. You don't know what you're talking about. You support NRA, what's wrong with you? You're a FUD. Now, that all sounds like fighting with each other, doesn't it? Here's my response to that. I support both. I'm a life member of GOA. I support them completely. And I'm a life member of NRA. I support them completely. Now, I'm not always happy with every decision that either of those organizations make. Right now, I'm not terribly happy with a lot of the things that are going on with NRA, but I will not abandon NRA or its 5 million gun-owning members. They are gun owners just like me, and rather than fight with them, I want to fight for them, and I hope they'll fight for me. And we'll fight together, but not against one another. We've got to stop fighting with each other and instead start fighting for each other. My goal in this podcast and my goal with GunGuyTV is to fight for you, to fight for your right under the Constitution to keep and bear arms, to fight for your country because it's my country too. Do not get confused by thinking that I need to do this to make a living, because I'll tell you right now, I don't. I can stop doing this podcast today, and I can stop doing GunGuyTV today, and it will not affect my income in the slightest. Well, it might actually. I might have more money left over than I did when I started. So I'm not in the business of doing YouTube or the business of doing podcasts. I thoroughly enjoy doing them, and I'm very passionate about the subject matter we're talking about because this is my country we're talking about. These are my countrymen we're talking about. These are my rights and your rights we're talking about. This is the country I've lived in my entire life and grown to love my entire life. Like it or not, I'm a patriot. I love this country. On the front of my house, hanging by the porch, is an American flag. There's been an American flag out there for all the decades we've owned this house, and there will be until the day my wife and I are dead. And I have a feeling if the kids keep this house, there'll be an American flag hanging out there then too. Because we are Americans. And we will fight for our brothers and sisters in this country. We will fight for our brothers and sisters in Christ. We will fight for our brothers and sisters in the Second Amendment. We will fight for our brothers and sisters who are Americans. I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to argue with you over which organization we support. I don't care what organization you support. I don't care whether you support NRA or GOA or the Firearms Policy Coalition or Second Amendment Foundation. I don't care. Pick one, if you can only do one, and support that one 100%. And you know what? I'm right there. I agree with you. And if I can support that one too, I will. So I want you to know my wife and I can afford it at this point. So we support NRA, GOA, the Second Amendment Foundation. I'm a life member of all of those. My wife is right now a life member of NRA. We're working on making her a life member of GOA. I'm also a life member of the California Rifle and Pistol Association, and I'm an annual member of Gun Owners of California. And as I've said before, I would be a life member of Gun Owners of California, but they don't offer that option. So I pay every year, and I try to contribute a little money along the way whenever I can. I also support my local assembly member who happens to be Randy Vopel, where I live. He's very conservative. And my local senator, who happens to be Brian Jones, who's running for Congress. And he's very conservative, both very pro-gun, and I support them. I contribute to their campaign whenever I can. These are people that we support because we're fighting for our Constitution and for our country within the state of California as best we can, and for our fellow Californians. I don't want to fight with you, and you should not be fighting with me. You should be fighting for me. We need to stick together and fight for each other's rights and not think that it's all about us. You know, the world does not revolve around me. Neither does it revolve around you. I am one of 7 billion human beings on this planet. I'm one of however many billions of people who have lived over time. And when I die, a very small number of people might take notice. And an even smaller number of people are going to care beyond a day or two. And those are my family. And in 50 years, no one will remember my name, except my immediate family if they're still around. Certainly in 100 years, nobody will remember that I ever existed except the Lord. I'm not that important that the world revolves around me, and I hate to tell you this, neither are you. So we probably should be fighting for each other and for the people who will come after us. This is what our founding fathers knew and understood, and this is what we get to do as well. So I wanted today to define those words for you. Master and servant. We are the masters of this country. The people who work in government are the servants of the people. Let us never forget that and change our way of thinking where that's concerned. And when it comes to fighting for our rights, let's fight for each other. Let's stop fighting with each other. If we can just get those two things on straight, we'll achieve great things for this country. So I encourage you to think about it over your morning coffee or whatever. And if you have comments or you disagree or you agree or you want to share your thoughts with me, please feel free to do that in the comments, or you can always send us a note on YouTube, or you can send us an email or whatever you wish to do. Well, that about wraps up this part of the podcast. This is the syndicated part. We're going to go into the next part. I'm going to talk about which is better, the Mini 14, the AR-15, or the AK. That ought to be an interesting discussion. I happen to like all three, by the way, and I own all three. But there are positives and negatives to each one. And I'll go over those in an unemotional, straightforward sort of way, and then people can throw bricks at the phone or whatever they're listening to the podcast on, and they can send me nasty notes if you want to do that. Thank you very much for listening. If you're listening to the public version, this is where it's going to wrap up. Have a wonderful week, and please be safe.
You've been listening to the GunGuy TV podcast.